it's not out of anger, or it's wonderful. I can't say that about myself. See, even though these techniques are good, and we need to learn these techniques, and I've had to learn some of these techniques, but those techniques in themselves will not produce a godly generation and will not guarantee you will pass on the faith. Nothing will guarantee that you'll pass on the faith, by the way, because everyone has to make their own decision too. And, you could do everything right, and then one of your children decides not to follow God, the Lord. See, because God is a God of love, He gives us free will. Some people say, well, God, should stop all this and stop all the terrible things. And I said, no. I said, the very fact that God allows these things is a proof that He's a God of love, because He doesn't force anyone's will. You cannot force anyone to love you. I have a wonderful wife. I really am very blessed. I know. But there was a point where I had to come to her and show her my love and affection, and there was a point that she could have refused that. That she said yes. I wouldn't have been loving if she said no and I forced myself on her. That's not love. God doesn't enforce Himself on anyone. He proposes. He proposes. He's love. He doesn't force us to follow Him. He doesn't force us to do anything. We just look for the Father's will and how to do it. So it's very, very important that we can't guarantee, but because God is good and God is faithful, if we follow Him, as a friend of ours who's an Orthodox priest by the name of Father Thomas Hopko, who's spoken at our conference, says, the saints come in clusters. And if you go back to the history of the church, many of the saints, particularly in the early church, came in families, brothers, sisters. So even if we look back at the history of the church, saints come in clusters. Passing on the faith is very important, because it usually if we create an atmosphere of fellowship, not just it's important to teach the faith. It's important to go to the sacraments. It's important to take our children to church. It's important to pray together. These are all very important disciplines. But our children catch who we are. And if we are not living out that fellowship with the Father, then they will say, well, you take me to church, but you do not behave like that at home. I don't want to go to church anymore. You see, children catch what you are. We have two sons, and you see, I'm amazed how much my sons have caught from me, that it's not Christian. They follow the same rugby league team. They follow the same Premier League football team in England as I do. I didn't tell them to. I just sat down with them and watched the television and barracked for the team. You see, it was caught and taught. I didn't tell them to follow Tottenham Hotspur in England. I didn't tell them anything. They followed. They followed as a team. Because I followed the team. You see, that's how important fathers are, particularly to their sons when it comes to these things. And if I promoted to football above the Lord, then they would have caught that too. But we always put the Lord first. Always the Lord first. His church, its teachings, the way of life in the community. First, then we do these other things. And it's important to have recreation and to do so in their place they are appropriate. Everything in its place is appropriate. In fact, it's a healthy thing to have recreation. But in our country, people are, they're crazy with sport. Crazy. 24 hours a day. Anyway, what am I getting to? Okay. Now, so there are some things you can do because today, what's the time? Time's going very quickly. Keep going. Anyway, Again, fathers and mothers, we have a problem in our society where there's a disintegration of the family. Fathers are out, the mothers are always working too, usually now. They put their children into daycare. So who's forming those children? Not the parents. There's the iPod, there's the music, there's the internet, there's the television, there are the peers. There's Twitter, there's Facebook. So who's forming the children? Actually, I got onto Facebook recently. Someone from Northern Ireland said, "Would you please?" I said, "All right." I went on, and within one day I cancelled it because I had all these people. I couldn't cope with it. You see, we have these pressures. And you see, in the past, if you were running your family, it was basically your family, the teachers at school, perhaps television, the church, formed your children. But now, in our society, even if we're in a covenant community, a lot of these other things are forming our children. And we need to be aware of those things. Now, I can go on to read here what the Pope said, that there are some problems in our society. He talks about divorces and, which are, today 1 every 2 nearly in Australia are breaking up, they're living together, and you've got same-sex and all this stuff. It's a problem we have to face. We have to face all sorts of problems, divorced people, and even into the community now. They're coming around. What do you do? You've got all these problems that we didn't have. People, abortion, sterilization, all sorts of things happening. But usually in the context of who we are, we can usually say those things are bad. We don't want them. But it's very difficult to sometimes see that these other things like television, Facebook, internet, because they're not intrinsically bad in themselves, like there's nothing wrong with them in themselves, they can be used for good. But the things that are coming through them are producing our children. They are the teachers of our children, not the parents, not the teachers at school, not the priest or the church, or even the covenant community leaders. But these things are forming our children. So we need to be aware, and in some schools in Sydney now, I know I haven't heard of it in Catholic schools, but certainly in some of the Christian schools, the schools have seminars for the parents how to deal with all the technology, so they can keep up, because even the things that I mentioned are nothing. There are many other things I'm ignorant. So if I had children today, I wouldn't know what they were doing. So it's very important, if you want to produce godly children, that these are some of the practical things, okay? The most important thing is the fellowship with God, who you are, the love that you have in the family, the fasting, the prayer, the availability of the parents to the children. They're the most important things. But then you have, if you're not aware, those things in themselves may not be enough, because you have all these other things. In our middle class society too, we have a lot of broken marriages, so that a father, for example, who's not living at home, would come and take the children every 2 weeks, and then in those 2 days give them all these gifts and money, and that's not very good for the children, because the father's not there, and then he comes and he lavishes all these toys and games, and you've got all these sorts of problems now that are new. All the children, if they're not in a covenant community, and again, your culture is different here. You are better than we are. But in our culture, many children grow up with no adult, not even their parents, there's no extension of the family. There are no other peers, and this is the beauty of the covenant community. And again, one of the reasons why our children have followed the Lord is because there were people like the Wayne Jordans and the Paula Blacks and, and the young people who mentored, who befriended our children and who, you see, because when children become adults, and this is where there's a word for you maybe as covenant communities, you really have to invest in having pastoral